Welcome to The Brave Journey Within with Jim and Jenn. This show is about the spiritual journey and all of the challenges, healing, wisdom, and consciousness expansion experienced along the way.
Welcome back to another episode of The Brave Journey Within. And we're going to be fearless today, talking about synchronicities and maybe shifts and changes and anything else that pops into our heads in this flow of conversation. But welcome, Jen.
Thanks, Jim. Welcome to you too.
So,
So,
yeah,
well, go ahead.
well, I was just telling you that, these synchronicities have been popping up. And, sometimes I'll tell people to write a synchronicity journal. I will often write the synchronicities that I experience in my journal just to like usually they're significant in one way or another, and it's like, okay, I need to know this.
I
It
love
could be
that.
a number of
Yeah.
different things, but I know you've I'm sure had very many interesting synchronicities in your life. So
Definitely. And I thought this was a great conversation to have because we also talked about just the upheaval and the transitions that people are having since the eclipse. It just seems like it's off the hilt. And I think there's a lot of confusion because a lot of this is happening out of the blue, or it's very sudden, major shifts. And maybe sometimes we're seeing things that you have built up to this, but other times I'm just people are in shock with what's going on in their lives. And so, with that confusion, it's often helpful to have synchronicities from the universe so we can be sure that we're on the right path, or that even though it seems chaotic or uneasy, that we're moving in the right direction. Because it can be so hard to figure things out sometimes with our thoughts and our brain. It's so limited. So tell me, you were telling me that you had some recent synchronicities, and just tell me what have you been experiencing lately?
well, massive sort of changes in my life. Um and there's like the thought too, right? Like, I mean, there's just a lot going on in the world. There is the threat of World War III. So there's like the fear in people, the economy. So you have these sort of financial things. And then what would that mean, safety and security wise, relationships, people passing away, people getting divorced, people breaking up. And all of these things tend to touch all of our lives in some form or another.
Yeah,
Um, So it's in those moments where, I mean, I will go within and meditate or pray and ask for guidance. I was actually talking to a very interesting woman the other day who is a psychotherapist, intuitive psychic, and astrologer. It
I
was
love that.
very interesting. I've never, you'll meet people that have certain gifts, and we all have gifts, right? No matter what your, you know, astrological signs is or whatever. You have gifts, and part of our time on this planet is to figure out what they are and to offer them in a sense. And a lot of times we run into problems when we're out of alignment with that. And so it can be helpful to kind of figure out and go within, really, because ultimately you're the one that makes the changes or deals with the things that you have to deal with, right? Like, you have to make the effort. I can't lean on anyone else. And if you go outside of yourself, with a lot of people do, you run the risk of uncertainty there. But when you're doing sort of your own work, and even if you get advice on something, it's, you're asking for clarity. Sometimes these synchronicities will come in. I think Jung wrote a lot about them. So just looking up the definition here, a lot of times people, I think, call synchronicities coincidences, even though they aren't.
Right.
But it's the simultaneous occurrence of events which appear significantly related but have no discernible causal connection. I disagree with that definition. I think it's all divinely orchestrated.
Yeah, I do too.
Like I feel like everyone you have that one moment in life where you're like, okay, there's maybe this was a coincidence, and then you fight really hard to like find a rational explanation for it, and you're like, I don't know what else to do. You have an experience like that that stands out, Jen?
I have many. I was just sitting here thinking like, gosh, there are so many. And sometimes it kind of correlates along with your intuitive development too, like your psychic side. Everybody has that as well. You have your intuition. And I remember the first time that I was like, that was weird. And it felt like a weird synchronicity to me. I
Uh,
was working at a job and I don't know, maybe 18. I was really young. And I was working at a billing desk. So I had my own little desk and I was doing billing for the company. And the phone rang and I would get calls all day long. And somehow I just answered, "Hey, mom." And it was my mom. And I was like, oh, thank God that was my mom. Because, like, if it was a client or a customer, like, I just, that would have been awkward. But I just knew somehow. And I didn't even think about it. And it was just like a weird coincidence. So, like, I think sometimes it goes hand in hand with your intuition, because then you also have to understand what the synchronicity means and what it's trying to show you.
yeah.
But yeah, so you were telling me one that you just experienced recently. I thought it was amazing.
Well, I'll get to those, but I met with this astrologer on Tuesday, and just a couple days ago, and she had emailed me. We'd been kind of communicating by email, and then you know how it is when you're busy, right? Like you don't get to your email, and she had said, I'm free from like 5 to 6. If you want to give me a call, just let me know. And I caught it like right close to 6 o'clock, and I'm like, you know what? Let me just give it a shot. So I just call her. I don't email her back, and because I think me, like most other people, like you don't pick up numbers that you don't know necessarily. And then she picks up the phone very hesitantly, and I'm like, hello, I'm Jim." And she's like, "I normally don't pick up the phone, but I did, thinking I thought it might be you."
That's awesome.
And then we started chatting, and what was the other thing? There was some other things and some interesting things that popped out in the conversation immediately that were like, okay. And then she was going away out of the country, and I'm like, well, maybe I guess I'll just see you in a few months or whatever, whenever you get back. And she goes, let me just look at my calendar real quick. And then she was like, I got a cancellation next week right before I go on my trip. And I'm like, well, that's fortuitous. Like, so I got in right away when typically you might have to wait a while. So it was like, okay, that was very cool. And then there was a number of synchronicities that I, I don't even know if we have time for, but when they start happening sometimes with people, it's super fascinating. It's like, how do I know this person? Like, how are all these connections taking place? But yeah, so that was super fascinating. And then a lot of it is, or at least it was kind of funny with the reading. She was like, kind of get the sense that you need to let out your inner freak. I was like, kind of like that, right? Like, but I kind of feel like I'm doing that with this podcast a little bit. Like, hey guys, here I am. These
I
are some
guess
of the.
there's deeper layers there. You're more freaky than you realize, Jim.
Well, yeah, and I think that's kind of like, when you are a professional counselor and therapist, right? You have to answer for that, and the land of the woo does not
Yeah.
necessarily correlate with that world or even spirituality, even though it's a huge part of most people's belief systems.
Yeah.
So it's kind of wild to think about because that's a lot of times I think a lot of therapists are afraid to go there or they haven't really opened up in their own spirituality. So it's hard to talk to someone who does have, a certain faith or spirituality as well. But yeah. So the synchronicities that happened over the past couple days after that, where I was using divination, so the tarot, and one of the decks that I've been working with is by a woman named Lisa Royal Holt, and she is a channeler of some repute. She's been doing this for a really long time, and it's her deck is called the Galactic Heritage Cards.
Do you have it in front of you so you can show anybody who's watching? Nice.
I don't know how well that comes across. If that
Yeah, I can see it perfectly.
okay, so these are super fascinating. So I'm asking for clarity, and I pull a card, and basically, there's certain I don't know, suggestions on how to do readings, but it was like, what is my call to action? So like I pull this card and it's the I'll just show the card, I guess. Spiritual sovereignty card. And the galactic beings that it says on here is Esasani. And then the Esasani are beings that Bashar supposedly comes from. So the entity known as Bashar is Esasani. Um, And so I pull the card and then I open the book and literally goes right to the page.
Yeah, that's amazing.
So I'm like, okay, I pulled the right card. so so I pulled it and I guess I'll read it. I don't know. It might be interesting for people to hear just kind of this world and kind of how this specific guidebook kind of works. Um, so it says spiritual sovereignty is a place of complete balance. One walks in integrity, has completed unfinished business, confronted and owned the shadow, recognizes illusion, and knows the self intimately without judgment. From here, the person becomes free to feel the flow of the universe that is called synchronicity. This is an essential Asasani teaching. Once you are firmly rooted in an open hearted life based on integrity and synchronicity, you become a fully realized being. This is a roadmap to awakening for individuals and Earth as a whole. If you haven't already, it is time to begin the journey. So then it goes into to kind of further explain this, but the Asasani is a species of hybrid of human and Zeta and is a highly evolved species assisting Earth through its transition, which is what we are in now, if you haven't noticed. And
Yeah.
deep within the Essassani collective memory lie the healed lessons of the Zeta, Orion, and human species. Because these lessons were fully integrated, the outcome is a species of pristine consciousness capable of non polarized thought and a catalyzing energy that propels others forward in their own process of integration. The concept of spiritual sovereignty is described well in the text above, but it is often a difficult concept for the mind to grasp, which is a tendency we all have, right? We have these ideas, but it's hard for our minds to wrap around sometimes. The human tendency is to think that something out there will bring us liberation or awakening, such as a specific meditation or process or having the right guru. But unless we clearly see the false self and refuse to live as that illusion, true spiritual freedom will elude us. The Essassani have broken through all illusion and achieved their spiritual sovereignty. and this potential is possible for humans as well. If you pull this card, it is most likely is acknowledging your potential to do this too. This is a message of gentle encouragement to continue forward and do what is necessary to awaken beyond illusion. Conversely, the card may instead be a warning that your current path may not be leading you toward sovereignty, but further toward illusion. I hope not.
I know, right? I don't know. I don't that doesn't sound right. I think you're heading towards the right direction.
It's be really truthful with yourself, which I think is very important.
Yeah.
Go deep within and open yourself to seeing what you need to see for your highest good. If you need assistance, call on the Essassani energy to guide you. One, well, that resonated very deeply with me in a lot of ways, but that was a synchronicity. And then it talked about the language of synchronicity as well in non judgment, which was super fascinating. And also, I mean, that's one of the things that the therapist said to me was that caught my attention. Is she said, "There's a lot of unemployed angels out there." Have you heard that before?
I think from you.
She said, they're just sitting there wanting to help, but you have to ask. I thought that was like a really very strange thing for a psychotherapist to say, but not someone who is very, I would say, soul embodied. Like, that's not a weird thing to say if you know that there's angels out there that want to help you. That's more
Yeah.
your realm, though.
Yeah, I love it. I think we should all be like, "All right, all of you unemployed angels, come help." I think that's fabulous. But I will say, they can only do certain things. They can't run your life for you. You have to go through the things you have to go through. They can help you navigate.
Well,
But
that would be more kind of victim, right? Like,
right.
mindset or spiritual bypassing, like, you do the work for me because I'm not willing to do it or something
Well,
like
and
that.
it's hard sometimes because, life is life, right? We all go through challenging times, and sometimes, I think a lot of times we're taken to our limit on purpose, because you can't grow without doing that, in order to
That's
build
like
that muscle. Yeah.
that's like that part that sucks, right?
Oh god, it sucks so bad. And that's when I'm like, "Where are you guys?" And they're there. But there are certain things that we need to get and understand, and, it's like when if you're in class and you're being told, let's say it's a science class, and you're told what to do in an experiment and to make certain things happen or not happen. It's not the same as going through the experiment yourself. And, while the angels or guides can sometimes help you through these things and they can give you step-by-step directions at times, a lot of times we have to work our way through it blindly. And there's purpose behind that. And it doesn't mean that they aren't there trying to help and support you, but you did like there's certain points in which you have to move forward believing in yourself and without their guidance, as a step-by-step instruction list,
Absolutely.
which I tend to want. I'm like, all right, guys, this is hard.
You're
Like,
right,
tell me
like,
what's next.
I could ask for help and it'll be given, and then
Yes.
go away.
Yes.
So this will lead me into my second uh, tarot um, experience synchronicity. So that the last reading, I don't know how much people caught, but it was talked about non-judgment. So this was a deck of cards that was gifted to me.
Love it.
The Light Seer, which I think is like a popular modern tarot deck based on, the was it the Rider Waite Rider deck.
Mhm.
So I pulled this card, right, kind of maybe a couple hours before we're coming on here, and this is the Major Arcana, the Judgment card. And then right away, pull my book open, it pops right there, and I'm like, "Oh my god." Like, spirit is, like, it's being like, "Hey, man." Um, so I'm like, okay, let's soak this in because this what's fascinating is that it's open to interpretation, right? So I don't get into the whole upside down type thing, but there is that polarity there, which I think could be helpful too. But the way that it came up is so light seer for judgment is self realization and understanding. So going through some rough times now requires to figure out, right, to process. Then it says spiritual awakening, which I think was the title of our last, I don't know, episode. Red- Redemption, knowing your motives and your heart to be true. Total transparency, a glorious unveiling of spirit. And then it goes into its description. You have judged others and have been judged yourself. And you are awakening to the understanding that the only approval that really matters is your own. And you're and you I'm sorry, are you doing your best with others and with yourself? It's time to shed any negative facades, drop the masks behind the masks, which I thought is very interesting. It may feel risky, yet this profound act of self acceptance will unleash your absolute essence. You are light, shadow, matter, and consciousness, and you are a miracle. Why, then, do you keep your true nature hidden away from the world? Fear.
Yeah, right.
There is no way to really understand your full potential until you are open and honest with your own heart without judgment. To expand and evolve requires this colossal forgiveness of the self. Forgive your beautiful soul, accept your beautiful heart. As you do, you consciously answer the call of your highest self, and the vastness of your horizon will make itself available to you. It has a nice little saying at the end. Hello, essence. I invite you to show up every day. I invite my soul to shine unapologetically. So those were my
Beautiful.
two synchronicities.
Beautiful.
It touches on a lot of topics that we've brought up, though. Spiritual awakening, trust, judgment, non judgment,
Yeah.
soul embodiment, allowing your essence and your power to emerge. Um, and like we've shared, like, this is constant work that I do on myself, right? It's not like I've figured out all the answers and speak from a bully pulpit here.
Well, I think as much as and there are definitely people in the spiritual community who are very high level, who you might think that they've done most or all of their work, but I don't think we're ever done until we merge with God again. I don't think we're done with the learning and the growing and the healing. Like it just seems like it's ever refining um, until we're at that place where we're actually done. Yeah.
So it's super interesting. I mean, you brought up the hero's journey, right? I mean, like all
Yes.
these sort of themes tying in you kind of right now with these sort of synchronicities that are popping up in my life and that I have the privilege of talking about with you and sharing with others. But there's all these things happening, this transition, but you also have these wonderful galactic beings that are, or angels and everything else kind of supporting you behind the scenes in this duality, um, wanting us to accomplish it. But we have to accomplish it ourselves individually and collectively.
What was just coming in, the reason I got quiet for a second, I just heard life can be messy. And I think a lot of times people tend to believe that if they awaken and they jump into their spiritual awakening and their growth and everything else, that they're going to get to a point where it never gets messy again. And while we don't necessarily wanna manifest it unnecessarily, we don't wanna create that messiness or the discomfort, for the sake of creating it or because we're not awake. But I think we have to realize that sometimes it can get a little bit messier because you have to uncover all those layers that you've been ignoring that need healing and that need to be resolved. And then sometimes, that ascension spiral, as you're coming back around and you're coming up to a different vibration, you're then able to look at something again and find even deeper healing that you need to go through or have a greater awareness of something to help you step further into that ascension journey. And like you're not done with an issue until you're truly done. You may be done for a time, but uh, like for example, I think I mentioned recently, maybe a month or two ago when we were talking, I was working on a very specific issue in my life and I was doing some work on my chakras around it and I was just cleansing and just trying to approach things differently. And at my root chakra, which is your foundation, your core safety, um, I heard father. And I knew I was like, oh, there's something I need to work on around my dad here. And I've done so much work around all of that, right? With everything with my dad. And my dad hasn't come up in years for me to work on. Like I felt like I had probably worked through it. And so, talking about synchronicity, later that day, I went to my wellness center and I was running a Zoom meeting. And we were talking about toxins and toxicity and weight loss and things like that. And somebody in that call was like, Jen, while you were talking, I got a intuitive hit about something. So after the call was over, we had a quick conversation and she was like, I really think it has to do with your dad. And I was like, interesting. Okay, so that's second time within a few hours that that was mentioned, right? Then a couple hours later, we had an event at Nourishing Journey at my center, and somebody else was running the event. And she passed around a book to everybody in the group and said, I want you to just open up the book and point to a spot in the page, and that is your message. It's called bibliomancy, which is another form of divination, right? And so I was the last person to go. And as I was waiting for the book to go around and everybody's reading their message, I said to my guides, I'm like, all right, show me what I really need to know. What is it I need to know? And they were like, are you sure? I was like, yes, I'm sure. Just show me. Just point me in the right direction. I opened the book, I point, I look down. It was a letter written to this woman's father. And I read the first line, and I don't even remember what it all said now, and I didn't take a picture. I wish I did, but it basically was like, I always wanted to be daddy's little girl, but I wasn't. Right. So, and I don't even know why, but I suddenly started bawling in front of all of these people. And I was like, well, clearly I still have healing to do around something. But, so the synchronicity of all that happening in the same day and the fact that I came to such emotion with that and it was even with different issues, things that I've been working on and trying to heal within myself. And that came up. So, like, you just don't ignore those synchronicities. They're so important, right?
No, it's hard to stay curious with them and be like, what is this about? Or in that case, maybe there, something to release, right? Like emotions, energy, emotion, and just letting that go.
Yeah.
Like that for somehow that your soul needed that to happen.
I don't know, but I was very grateful. It was such a beautiful day with those synchronicities. I just loved it. Yeah.
Yeah. What other are there any there's one involving your son that, is very fascinating to me.
All right.
At one point, I think it must have been the time when you had the famous actor over from Dawson's Creek, this
Oh, yeah. Kerr Smith.
Kerr Smith
Kerr.
Kerr Smith?
Yeah.
And so your son Jacob was telling me about the law of one and Ra, and I was like, like in my mind, I'm like, the sun god? Like, who is Ra? Like, not really fully comprehending any of that. So then, um, and I mean, Jacob said it very, tenderly and very seriously, like, "Oh, we're having this conversation. Like, all these people we're gonna have this discussion about this." I'm like, "Well, that sounds super interesting, but like outside of my, radar of things that are of interest." And it was years later. I was reading a David Wilcock book. I'm not even sure. It might even be Synchronicity now that I'm thinking about it. It's
The
some book.
synchronicity keys, yeah.
It might even be that, but he talks about the law of one a lot in the book. I'm like, what the heck is this book? And so finally I go, as you do, look up the book, and he goes, the raw material. It's a channeled book, from Ra, the Ra Collective, who I don't know exactly who that all is.
Mhm.
Are you aware of that? Like the Ra Collective, are they connected to any galactic type
Yeah, to me, they feel like they're Pleiadian.
Pleiadian?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, intuitively, that's what I get is that they're Pleiadian.
So for people unfamiliar with that, although I guess if you listen to this, you're probably familiar with Palladians. They are percentage wise probably more in tune with what's going on our planet in terms of our transition or ascension or shift. Mostly good, mostly positive.
There was it's just reminding the first time I ever heard of like Pleiadians. Well, so this kind of goes down a rabbit hole. But when I first started doing energy healing, the first thing I got into was learning how to clear entities. And as I got more and more into healing, things got more and more complicated, like really learning how to, because there's different types of entities. Some of them are, more galactic negative beings. Um, and so there's all different types and forms of negative entities, if you want to call it that. Um, so as I was going down my healing journey and learning more and more about how to do clearing work, uh, I was starting to have to learn about negative galactic beings, which some people have no idea even exist. And I was having a hard time finding answers about how to do clearing work for that. And my Reiki master had lent me a book. I think it was called the Pleiadian Workbook, but it went through like these healing chambers basically of Pleiadian energy and starting to get connected with the Pleiadian energy. And so I started using those chambers on the couple of people that had those issues, and they both would react the same way. So, but that's a whole different story. But like with the energy healing, it was just it was very different and it was helping them. And their bodies would jerk and they would like do things. And like it was so fun to watch. And it actually was very effective. But one, she says, and I can't remember all the different groups, but there's like the Ra group, there's a Ka group, there's Pata, and there's one more. And off the top of my head, I can't remember what that is because I don't really work with that. But um,
Like among the Pleiadian.
uh-huh. Yeah, exactly. So they're like collectives within the Pleiadians. And so when I heard about the raw material, I think there was a natural assumption that it was the Pleiadians, but when I connected into it and felt into it, it feels Pleiadian to me.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, so I think that's what it is. And I think I tend to resonate with the raw collective. I wouldn't be surprised if, as a soul, maybe I'm a part of that in some way. I do
Yeah.
feel like I very much am a part of the Pleiadian energy. So,
Yeah. Should
yeah.
we
So,
unpack that a little bit for people, just the concept?
how do you unpack that, Jim? I don't know. So, our souls
Like
have
stars.
origins.
Well, so for example, a friend of mine, when I got into past life regressions, did a past life regression, and it came out that he was an alien, a
Mhm.
Pleiadian. And at the time, I had no idea what it was. And that was probably another a synchronicity too. So the day that we were having this conversation, I'm like, "Dude, I'm so sorry, like, I don't know what happened, like, why would why would a hypnotherapist tell you that you're an alien? This makes no sense to me." Um,
You've come so far, Jim.
well, right? This is only a few years ago. I'm like, "This sounds ridiculous. Like, what the hell is a Pleiadian?" So then he's like, "No, no, no, it's like a real thing. I looked it up." And I'm like, "What?" So this is like a CPA, right? Like very kind of black and white. Like these are the numbers. These are the facts. This is the logic. And so I Google it, and I'm like, okay, Pleiadians, and I start reading about them, and then they're like, yeah, like most people will know this, the Pleiades, like from the symbol of like the Subaru, like the star systems on like the logo of the Subaru car. And I had literally just bought a Subaru. And I'm like, "What?" So the stars on this symbol of a Subaru are the Pleiades, and you're an alien. What a day. So then it was like, okay, like, I guess that's a synchronicity, right? Like, could it just be a coincidence? I don't believe that anymore, but at the time, like, you try to
Yeah.
explain it that way.
Well, I think there's a lot of truth for that. And I some people say that all of us are alien, right? My guides have said that we're not all alien souls. I guess there are certain star systems through which we are intended to be born in. But there's that term called star seeds, or in the law of one, they call them wanderers. But those really are, you know, those souls born in other places that have come here to help the ascension cycle. So,
I think Dolores Cannon also, I think she has a book called The Three Waves of Volunteers
mhm.
in the New Earth. But I think like and she uses the term wanderers too, but like the volunteers, like these souls volunteering to come here specifically in these waves to kind of set the stage for this, you know, shift or transition into a new earth or whatever you want to call it. But that was very fascinating, right? So that opened up my okay, well, I've kind of always been fascinated by UFOs and aliens and that kind of thing. Although I was very terrified of aliens and UFO abductions and all that kind of stuff. But the
Yeah,
fact that people
same here.
communicate with, you know, entities or galactics, I guess is the more appropriate word of the moment.
That's usually the term that I use because it doesn't have a charge to it necessarily. So I tend to try to use that.
I was talking with a medium who was telling me about Star Wars being channeled by George Lucas, like that whole thing. And I think it really ties back to what I now know is known as the Orion Wars.
Mm. See, I wonder if it was channeled or if he was, my conspiracy mind is like, all right, who in the government was he working with? Who
Yeah.
wanted that put out into the realm of the average person?
Yeah. Easy to do. Easy to do.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe he channeled it. Maybe it came from elsewhere.
Well, how it was framed to me was that he was like the historian who was chronicling that, and then in this incarnation, he's retelling the story basically.
Well, I guess, we may never know, but I believe it. I believe there's a lot of truth in that.
Oh, I mean, think about with how many people that story resonates with.
Right? I know.
Like it's like deep inside your DNA or your soul consciousness that resonates. Like there, in some ways, you look at these things, and you're like, okay, well, that sort of gives you the sense that that might be part of your makeup, right? Or your past, your ancestral connection. Otherwise, it wouldn't resonate, I would think.
Yeah, I think you're right on. When I think too, coming back to synchronicities, I think we tend to watch these movies at the right time too. Whenever your soul needs to awaken to a certain idea, or awareness, we come into that movie. And it's funny because we've talked about The Matrix a few times, and I haven't watched that movie in so long. I decided I was going to watch the trilogy, and I was just going to start from the beginning and go to the end. I'm almost done with the third one, maybe
Yeah.
halfway through. But I was just like, there's so many things I forgot about in that movie. So I don't know. Maybe I
What, like,
just
the
need to see it again.
symbolism or, like, the
Some of the
different
symbolism, some of the just maybe things I took for granted or just was not paying attention to on a deeper level. But it's interesting how we come back to something like a book or something, even, something we've read before, and we're like, I don't know why, but I already read this, but I feel like I need to look at it again. And then you pick up something different. And I think that we're just at a different, that ascension spiral. We're in a different place where we can take different things in or see it from a different lens and process it in a higher way. And yeah, it kind of blows my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always interesting. Even with the tarot and anything else, like, you pull a card and there's a different interpretation in a sense.
That's very
Or,
true.
or if I read the definition, certain words will stand out, or there'll be like a new takeaway from it, new perspective, which, I mean, obviously our perspectives are always changing as these things arrive in our lives.
Yeah, I think, we often see through the goggles of our wounding. And hopefully in our healing journey, we're clearing those goggles, you know,
Yeah.
our wounded glasses here. We're kind of seeing things through the wounding, and as you heal, your vision becomes more clear, and you can take more in or see more broadly what it's trying to represent. You
I
know,
can't remember if we mentioned this on the last episode, but did we talk about how, like, it's I think there's some research done that, like, 80% of what we see in someone else is our own stuff. It's like our own projection. Like, we're not actually
I don't know if we talked about that, but I absolutely believe it. Yeah.
at that number struck me as like, wow, that's kind of high. But then at the same time, I'm like, but people do that
Yeah.
often, right? Like, to the point of completely mislabeling a person
Yeah,
or,
and
right,
yeah, we
creating.
were yeah. Yeah, we were talking about, lying to ourselves, right? And, in my holistic metamorphosis class, we talk about, like, the foundations of a consciousness that will help you heal. And one of it is talking about mirroring. And, mirroring is confusing sometimes because I think most interactions are a mirror. Maybe not, I don't think all, but I think most. And 80% sounds about accurate to me in the way I experience that. And but it doesn't mean it's like, let's say someone lies right to your face, bold face lies, and they're just always lying. It doesn't mean that you're always a liar, but it could mean that you're lying to yourself about something, or that there's a part in you that you need to heal because maybe in a previous lifetime you have been a liar or something. That's a very generic example, but it gives you an idea of an energy that you're processing within yourself. It doesn't have to be tit for tat kind of a thing. It can be very confusing sometimes to see what it is they're actually mirroring.
Yeah. I can remember I was in a meditation retreat, and they were very specific about the type of technique that we were doing, and sort of some of those very strict with the rules. And there was a guy who was doing like a yogic technique and was putting his body in a certain way, and he was reprimanded. And I'm sitting behind him, and I'm like, in my mind, this is in complete silence, but I'm, like, completely judging this guy, like, did he just not hear it? Is he just being arrogant? Like, "Well, I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do anyway."
Yeah.
I created this whole story over the course of this week. I'm in silence about what a terrible guy this is, and then lo and behold, I think this was meant to happen. We're, in line maybe for food, and, at this point, you could talk, and I got right next to him, randomly. And we start talking, and I'm
Right.
like, man, this guy's like super cool. Like, I actually like this guy. Like, this entire story that I have in my mind is complete bullshit. And then right around that time, another guy walks up and he goes, "Excuse me," to this guy who I'm having this conversation with. And he goes, "I just want to tell you, I see auras and you have one of the widest auras I've ever seen."
Wow.
He says, "I just wanted to share that with you." And I'm sitting here like, what the hell is an aura? Like, what does my aura look like? What does that mean? Like, had no clue about that. Come to find out later that there's psychologists actually nearby that do that's one of the services they offer is sort of aura readings, interpretation, but essentially it's energy that they're able to perceive in one form or another. Do you see auras? Is that something that?
I have. I don't see it all the time, and usually when I see it, with the exception of a couple of times, it's usually just like that first layer around the body, and,
Is it a visual like?
it just looks like almost like someone's shining a light, so I can it just you can see a glow,
Uh-huh.
and I have to like, when you look at an aura, you don't look directly at it. You have to kinda, like, relax your eyes and let your senses take over, and so you're not looking at the thing. Like, so let's say, Jim, if I'm going to try to see your aura, it's usually really easy to see around the head and shoulders. Um, so I might like just gently look like off to the left or right, or maybe just above your head and just have like a soft gaze without any focus. And then I
Mhm.
can see it. Um, I have seen colors in people a couple of times, usually in classes. And I'll have people get up against a wall, and the whole class will practice seeing each person, and you can, and usually most of the class can see it when we're doing this as a group. And we've even had somebody who was not in their body, and their you could see their whole outline of their aura over here.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then we were like, all right, you're not in your body, and she tried to come in, it was like, "Mm." And then we go over to the other side. And so that was fascinating because, again, most people in the class saw it.
Yeah.
And in that class, a couple of times I think I saw a yellow, and then I might have seen almost like a greenish color, but it's real faint. And then one
Mhm.
time I was working with Jacob before school, and I used to give him Reiki before school. And I was like sitting at his head and sending energy down his body. And I was in that soft gaze again where I was not hyper focusing on anything. I was just in a gaze. I saw from his leg, I was like kind of like gazing down towards his right leg. And it was like a river of the most beautiful blue energy you can imagine, like an indigo kind of blue, but it was absolutely beautiful and had sparkles all through it. And it was flowing like a river down his leg. It was moving like, you know, and I
Yeah.
was just like, I focused and I was like, what was that? And it disappeared. So I was like, all right, well, if that was real, I'm going to be able to get into that soft gaze again and see it again. And I did. So I don't know. I guess that was his aura, or maybe it was something else because I've never seen anything else like that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just his natural being color. I don't know, but
Yeah. I
he
don't.
is what I would call a crystal child. One of the levels of kids that have come in to shift things. So there was indigo, and there was crystal, and then I think there was like rainbow.
Oh, I have heard a indigo child. Okay.
So yeah, the indigos are usually more from like the 80s, and I think some started in the 70s, like 80s, 90s, and then came in the crystal children, which a lot of those with autism are the crystal people, the crystal souls,
Mhm.
and then now it's like the rainbow. And my understanding of it is, and I think there's a lot more to it, but my understanding of it is that those who came in as crystals, it's like such a different vibration, and it's hard to navigate this density with the vibration that they're in. But the rainbow souls came in, and they're more easily integrating, and they're meant to kind of like really stabilize the new energy here, that Christ consciousness energy. So
Mm,
yeah, so I
that
think,
is
the crystals were bringing in that energy. I think
yeah,
the indigos were meant to disrupt the system and
yeah.
start thinking outside the box, so we aren't all just like, parroting
Amy
the same BS. Yeah.
Amy talked about, my daughter being a rainbow child, and I had never heard that term before.
Yeah,
Uh, I
yeah.
still don't really know what it means, but I
Well,
had sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say they're and I like to think of it, they're just really wise souls that are
Uh,
coming in, I didn't read the book, from Dolores Cannon that you're talking about, but I think about them being those 3 waves.
well, that's what I mean, when you were talking, that's what I thought of, like, there's these
Yeah,
specific waves of, certain children, souls coming in at that time.
yeah,
Wow, fascinating.
yeah.
You were talking about seeing colors in classes. That's the only time I've ever seen colors that I can vividly recall where it was sort of like confirmed for me. But there is a guy named Bill Sanda that does readings at your place every now and again, and Akashic readings. And part of his you kind of meditate and pray over, like you're like around the person that he's doing the reading for, and you're praying for them, and
Oh.
you're in this silent meditative state. And I remember when I was doing that, and I can't remember, it's not necessarily Reiki, but you're almost like having hands up, or like, sending them your love, that they're going to get that energy and connection and sort of healing. And I remember having my eyes closed and seeing these colors. It was like purplish and gold, like, but very vibrant. And that's not something that I typically might see in a meditation. And then when the guy was talking about his reading, he was like, I felt myself being just bathed in this gold and purple color. And I was like, what? Gotta be kidding. Like, I was seeing purple and gold without a doubt, and that's what you're talking about, you experienced? So that was the first time I didn't, it was in my own mind visualizing this. So I wasn't looking at the person and seeing it around them, or if it was some type of aura or anything like that. So I don't even really know what it was, other than it was some type of energy. I'm sure, colors have frequencies, and there's connections with angels and colors too. I've met, well, I've met children who see angels, but angels as colors.
Yeah, I tend to see them as colors too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've only seen them twice as colors, I'll put it that way, but I knew that they were there, and then I saw those, like, plasma balls, and I was like, "Oh my gosh."
Yeah, or
And it's
like
the color
auras.
that people talk about, so
Yeah, very fascinating. Are there any specific angels that you like working with? Or I know you have done angel meditation type things to connect.
yeah, I work with the archangels a lot. I also work with a group called the Oroshome, which come in for the holistic metamorphosis modality that I do, and they're like all the different levels of the angels. They've got different ones. It's like a special focused group where they bring forth a very specific kind of energy for the ascension. And but I love working with the archangels too. So I do mostly with them. What about you, Jim? Do you work a lot with the angels?
There's an angel oracle deck that I have when I first started playing around with cards, and that's when the Metatron um, card started popping up like repeatedly, where I'm like, okay, and then it like frightened me. So I'm like, okay, there's something's messing with me here. But in my office, I have a lot of sacred geometry, and then some of it is Metatron's cube. So that, maybe that one specific, I'll invoke Archangel Michael, and actually I have another deck of cards that it's it focuses on Archangel Michael, Archangel Raphael, Archangel Uriel, and then Gabriel. Um, I've been told I have a connection with Gabriel, but I don't see him or anything like that. But I have prayed in that in that way, and there's specific prayers tied to the cards that I've used. Um, so in that way, I work with them. But it is nice to know that they are there, that you can work with them if you would like. Are there any particular resources you might recommend if anyone wanted to look into that at all?
Well, I mean, I do have an archangel. Not to plug myself, but I have an archangel activation and healing course. So if anybody's interested, hit me up. But
Feel free to plug yourself out. Like, come on now. Like
well,
you offer these very cool programs. Like they exist.
but there's so many resources out there and meditations and things like that. But really, if you really want to connect with an archangel, just get into a sacred space, which means defining your space around you as pure and clear and defining what you want to bring in. And then bring in an archangel. So a lot of people start with Archangel Michael, or some people call Michael. Bring in Michael and just see what that feels like. It has a very certain energy about it. And then try Raphael, and then maybe try Zadkiel. And, so there's so many of them, more than we could even potentially name. But it's just like get a feel for their energy. And they're all different. They all have different purposes in what they do. Reading about them is one thing, experiencing them is where it's at.
Well, so I definitely know that one time, at least, you know, I think it was Amy, it might have been someone else, but just my experience on the boat was my guardian angel. Um,
Yeah.
and when I asked what she looked like, she was talking about, like, these colors. So it was very fascinating. Um, so I guess I've had at least one interaction with them.
I'm sure you've had many.
Jokingly, I've had many more. The comment from my art or from my guardian angel was like, "Could you please pay more attention to what you're doing?
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah.
not get on the rickety boat next time."
Can you imagine the job of a guardian angel? Just like
Oh my gosh.
the levels of miracles that probably happen every time we step off the curb, and you know what I mean? Just like keeping us safe, making sure that we're not doing something at the wrong time. What if you get stuck behind someone slow and you're driving on the highway? That could be because your guardian angel is like, gosh, they won't slow down. They're going to have an accident a mile up ahead. We got to slow them down. It's like
Oh
we
my
just
god.
don't know all the times they actually come in and manage things because we're not.
I have no doubt. I just heard a story, yeah, the other day about that, like where it's like, a few inches more and I wouldn't be here. It's like, yeah. I love my dad, but he falls all the time, and I jokingly say this, like, "Your guardian angel is putting in overtime." Like, I hope you're thanking her. Like, my god, unbelievable.
Yeah, I agree. Well, maybe we should do a talk on that someday.
Absolutely. I'm sure I would enjoy that, and people would enjoy that as well. Um, alright, so you have a number of classes that you offer on your website. Do you wanna tell people where they can find those services?
Yeah, and I'll link it also in the description, but it's Jen with two N's dash Palmer.com. So JENN dash PALMER.com.
Alright, I know I've taken your Reiki 1 class, and, I mostly just do Reiki on myself, though. But it's wonderful, and, yeah, feel free to reach out, and also, please, any comments or feedback or questions that you have about anything that you've heard, things you like, things you would like to hear more about, or anything else is welcome. We would really appreciate it, and also if you could rate the show too, that apparently helps as well, so Anything
Awesome.
else you'd like to add, Jen?
No, that's it. And I hope everybody has a great day.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, till next time. Take
Bye.
care. Bye.
We are so grateful that you joined us. Check out the description to learn more about us and also for additional resources to help you on your journey.